welcome back. This is another Photoshop tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about the pen tool and paths and complex selections. So let's take a look at Photoshop, and we can see over here we can hover over our pen tool and we can take a look at the hotkey for the pen tool, which is P, and we're going to find a spot of complex geometry that we want to fill with the pen tool. So first of all, one thing you should know with the pen tool is it operates a little differently than some of the tools we've been using before. It's a little bit like the polygonal lasso in that you basically set different anchor points. And as you set an anchor point, you'll be prompted to next decide where do you want to place the next anchor point. And as soon as you place it, you can hold down, you can see it sets a straight line, but if you hold down and drag from that point, it's going to create a curve, or a Bezier is another fancy word for curve. So we're going to continue this around. And the idea here is that we actually want to kind of give these, between the points, we want to give a nice amount of space. And you can see right away when I place that, there's still a little bit of distance between the line that we want to keep it within and this next point. So I'm just going to actually continue along here. We can actually change this later. If we want to change this point so that it's more smooth and wraps around this line, we can hold the command key, which allows us to select an anchor point, and we can actually pull it down to fit inside that space. So this is a really handy way to kind of fit shapes inside of a space, and then we can bring our line and grab it and continue this path. And if we want to, let's say just I want to get this next point up here, but I want to follow this curve of this line. If I click, you can see it sort of goes way off the side, and that's not really useful for us. So what we want to do is hold Alt, click, and it actually places the next point so that there's no handles, meaning it's just going to go into a straight line. If you're able to see that, there's a handle here that goes way off to the side. That means it's essentially your editing of this curve, so that if I click again, it's going to follow this curved line, and it's going to keep that curve continuing. And we don't want it to do that. We want it to go right into a straight line. So let's come up here, grab that, pull it out, find a nice spot. And again, if I wanted to match this curve, I already know that I pulled this handle way out. So if I click, it's going to be all kinds of weird. It's not going to do what I want. So I'm going to again hold down Alt, click, which sets an anchor point and removes one of the handles, and then move on to the next point of contact that we want to find. And I'm going to do this again, hold Alt, click, come back to the next point to complete the shape, and just release. And we can see now we have this completed path, this shape that we so beautifully within our outline here. And what I want to do is I'm going to bring back all of our layers, and I'm going to remove, this is the layer we were using before for just exploring filters and so forth, but I'm going to bring this back, and I really want to start working with color again. So let's go in here and say these are actually a particular color that I created. This is an order. These are sort of, this image is based a little bit on the chakra system, so I'm going to actually make this green. And so I'm going to call this green leaves. And I have here in my layers panel next to it paths. And this used to be, they used to be docked next to each other, but now the layers, the paths layer was actually over here. You can see it has this sort of these anchor points and the symbol that represents paths. What I did is I actually dragged that onto my layers because I actually like to use this fairly frequently. And you can see it created what's called a work path, which means that this is currently what I'm working with. This path is still a path. It's not really doing much for me. If I actually click off of it, it'll disappear. And so in order for it to not go away, if I were to create a new path right now, this essentially would go away. So I have to name this in order to keep it locked down. And I'm just going to save this path, and let's name it green leaf 1. Hit OK, and we can see now this is our path. If we actually hold down the Alt key, we can turn this path into a selection. And this is the same as if we go down here and we click this turn path, load path as a selection. We have other options too, like we can even stroke the line so that it actually creates an outline along the edge of the path, or we can fill this path with the foreground color. But let's just, for now, let's just turn this into a selection. So I'm going to hold down Alt, click. We can see now it turned this leaf into our dotted line, our nice selection. And if I go back to layers, what I want to do is I'm going to fill now this space, and I'm going to fill it with a green. This green I'm currently on is a little bright. So I'm going to go down here, holding spacebar, maneuvering down, and hit I for eyedropper, select the color I want, come back up, and zoom in. That was way too far. Okay, still too far. I zoomed way in. Let's get back here a little bit. Cool. All right, so now we've got a selection, and let's just fill this selection. So how do we do that? So there's a couple ways to do that. Oops, I lost my green somehow. Well, that's fine. I'll just go back and get it from the swatches. I believe I saved those greens. No, I did not. Well, I'll just pick green for now, just as a placeholder. Come back to our layers palette panel. And I'm just going to hit Alt Delete on the keyboard to fill. You can see that filled it nicely, filled it behind our line art. So what happens when we hide the line art? We can see that's really nice, clean lines we got going on there, right? The paths that we created are really crisp and beautiful. Now, what would happen if I actually wanted to, say, duplicate this and copy it so that it went all the way around the image? So there's a couple ways to do this. One is to actually take our move tool, hold down the Alt key, and move it down. And we can see this is actually shifting the fill, and it created a copy on top of it. As soon as I hold down the Alt key and drag, it turns it into a copy. And then I can hit Command T on the keyboard. So I'll just do that again. So I'm on my new layer. It's a copy of this other one. Command T turns it into a transform. This is a free transform tool, and I'm just rotating it out, kind of figuring out, okay, that looks pretty good. So this is not going to fit perfectly, but it's going to be darn close. And okay, so there we go. So that's one way to do this. There's a different way to do this, which would obviously take a lot less time. And did you guess? I don't know if you did, but we're going to go for the magic wand tool, W on the keyboard. And so instead of spending all that time going and creating a path like we just did, see, the beautiful thing is this is a nice clean path, but we really just want to fill this whole thing, this whole space with green. So we would use the magic wand. So we can just hold shift. And what I want to show you is you can also, in addition to turning paths into selections, you can also turn selections into paths. And so you can see right here next to load path as selection, this is load make work path from selection. So if I click that, now we see we have all of these paths. And so this is great because sometimes your artwork is going to be different depending on, you know, what shape it is and all that. And so if you want to make paths, you can actually go in and manipulate them. And you can see if I've got the move tool, or excuse me, the pen tool. I'm holding down command again. I can actually go in here. I can select, you know, a particular path, and I can maneuver it, and I can actually move it around, manipulate it however I want. So this is really useful. This is one way that paths, sort of selections, can be turned into paths. Paths can be turned into selections. So that's pretty much it in terms of paths. Another thing we can do is we can actually stroke. So let's just say stroke the path with brush. And this will actually use your current. So if I hit B on the keyboard, it's actually going to stroke it with this brush. So this is going to look pretty unusual. So if I do this, you can see what it did there on the art layer. So we might want to like create a new layer. And let's just make it yellow just so you can see that really clearly. So if I select my work path, I'm just working with this one right now. I hit stroke, basically stroke path with brush. It's going to stroke it with the current brush, and that gives a really interesting texture actually. So you can be creative with this. You can figure out different ways to use paths, get a really clean shape, and then stroke it with the brush that you want to use. And that can be really, there's a lot of possibilities there. So that's it for this tutorial on the pen tool and using paths in creative ways. So I hope that helps, and we'll see you next episode. Next time we're going to be talking about the rectangle, ellipse, line, and polygon tools, as well as the custom shape tool.